Um, Evening, everyone. This is Professor Tennyson Mukuchini here. Welcome to part 2 of the Writing for Publication session that I'm facilitating with you. As you may recall, this is a 3-part session, that's 3-part workshop that we're doing on really preparing you so you can be educated about how you write things for publication. And when we say publication, we're talking about accredited journals. For those of you who are joining today and did not join yesterday, I strongly recommend that you watch that first part, because there are many things in there that are critical to your writing success. In short, what yesterday showed us is that your success has as much to do about your preparation for the writing journey as it is about the writing itself. And what we covered yesterday was we looked at issues around preparation, how you go about assessing your own writing potential, working out how best to identify a topic that would have the right sort of wow factor, how you go about identifying potential journals that you go to, and also just the whole journey of how you prepare yourself for article writing. And some things that may not be obvious became obvious yesterday, and one of them is that you cannot start writing an article unless you know what potential journals you want. You can only write into accredited journals, and this status around accreditation is a status that's decided on by the Department of Higher Education and Training. If you don't know anything about it and you missed yesterday's session, I suggest that you just Google accreditation of journal articles in South Africa, and you will be able to find something on there that guides you. The other thing that we concluded on and arrived at yesterday was the fact that if you submit a piece of work and that work is not rejected at the on arrival at the editor's desk, then your chances of it being published increase seminally, and so forth. We also, I said it, but I might not have said it clearly. There are many people who think that they can write articles from their dissertations or from their theses by just copying and pasting things that are on there. And the truth of it is, the answer to that is no, you cannot. Many supervisors will talk about it as if it's a direct relationship where you finish your thesis or you finish your master's and you just take pieces of it to publish. It is not like that. You have to look at what the journal you are targeting writes like, or how they've separated out their content areas, and then you have to take some content and rewrite it, phrase it differently for use in the paper. So of course your master's and your doctoral thesis will give you content from which you can extract information for an article, but under no circumstances should you believe that they are a direct source where you copy and paste 4 pages. It just does not work like that. And folks, I say this as someone who's been editor, I think probably for about 12, 14 different journals, and the experience has been very clear that they look down on things that look like someone who has modified a master's or doctoral piece for a journal, because it suggests that you're almost sort of double dipping. So just think about that. Think about the effort needed to change it. So what we're doing today is actually, now that I shared some of the preparation and the concessions and the planning that you have to make, I now want to just walk you through the elements of a typical article you would write. I say typical because if you remember, my direction from yesterday was that you need to find your target journals first. And when you found them, you look at the structure they follow, you read some of their papers to see how they position things, because not all of them are the same. And how you find all this out is every journal you find has got a website. And on that website, they will have something that they call author guidelines. And those guidelines will tell you all these things. And on that site, they also have examples of previous or recently published things. You look at those and you make sure that you work with them. So that's literally what you have to do. Now, as a quick, and that was the preliminary information provided yesterday. As I say now, I'm going to walk you through what a general typical paper looks like. Of course, this is general. The themes, the things, the tendencies, the things you prioritize are similar to many other publications, but once you have identified where your paper is going, you make sure that you go to that journal first and understand their structure, their patterns, and then you develop your paper using them as a guideline, not the thing I've shown you now. What I'm showing you now will assist you to deal with certain generic areas that come up, but the way in which they are ordered, the extent to which they are emphasized, all that will change depending on the journal you target. So just remember that. Now, folks, as you know, with our sessions, what will certainly happen now is I will share with you my screen so you can see the presentation, but I will also then turn off my camera and we'll turn it on at the point of dealing with your questions. So now, okay, so remember there was all the things I spoke about in relation to how you position yourself for an article. You position yourself for an article by making sure that you find the right place to take it. You sensitize the journal of the article to your intention to publish it there. You do all these wonderful things. But most of all, what you then have to do is, of course, you can be set right, you can stand right, you can do all these things, but ultimately, the paper that you write, the way you structure it, the way you emphasize what it's looking at, are the things that will make your paper become one that stands out. So all that positioning is perfect, but once we've positioned you, you have to run the race. And today we're talking about running the race. So now, okay. So the very first thing is you always need to understand what motivates people, or the different things that motivate people, because each of these motivations they create a certain type of tendency. And that tendency is not always good, it's not always bad, but it is important if you are in the business of publishing to understand the psychology behind why someone writes. So some people will write just because they've got an excellent paper, excellent idea, and they are doing that because they feel that that idea deserves to be shared because it will extend knowledge about a specific domain. Otherwise, the other thing is sometimes some people decide that before I die, I want to have an article published, and I'll do it as a form of self-actualization. Then, of course, who you are as students, for the most part, you are writing it because you need to achieve completion as part of your terminal dissertation or thesis process. So basically, you are doing this because you recognize, or there is a requirement that you write as part of the completion of your study. So what that does, or what that does for you, is that it makes you a very specific type of writer. So you are a writer who has one, limited time. You cannot apply for journals that are known to have a 5-year turnaround time before they accept papers. You can't do that. Secondly, you must apply and use a journal that's an accredited journal, because that's all that the university will acknowledge. I've told you several times about what accreditation is. I've also told you about the list that you can Google anytime and get a list of all the journals that are covered. And these journals, by the way, they are not by subject field. They are normally in alphabetical order. But if you are in sociology, you just look for journals that say sociology in them. If you are in public health, you do the same. If you are in metallurgy or engineering of metals, you would look for something that has those terms. Or you can even Google, just say, what are the 10 most popular accredited journals, and then you pursue to see if they are on the list. There is no more automated way than just manually going through that thing. Of course, some of us are in departments, or we have relationships with people who are in the field, and they will refer some journals by mouth. But before you target the journal, you must first go and check that it's on the 2021 accredited list, not the 2021, not the 2019 one, because accreditation status is a fluid thing. If a journal is found to be poor in any way or not, it loses its accreditation. So a journal that was accredited last year won't necessarily be accredited this year. So the other thing about what type of writer you are, so you want a good turnaround, you want it to be accredited. You also don't necessarily have a piece of work that has that wow factor, you know? So many dissertations, I mean, I hate to say this, but many theses, many dissertations, when you read them, they are focusing on things that are fairly pedestrian. When I say pedestrian, common, you've seen them. They are focusing on an angle that's been maybe done before, and they're just almost doing a replica of other things. You cannot, if you have a piece of work that's like that, enter the world of publishing confidently. So what you have to do is look at the body of your dissertation, the body of your thesis, and say, right, what are the things that stood out about this work? So if there's any element that you thought stood out and made it particularly outstanding, then you start to ask yourself, why don't I make this the potential thing that I write about? So your dissertation or thesis might have 3 objectives, 5 objectives, 8 objectives, and there might be one objective that's particularly sophisticated, particularly topical, particularly relevant. So you have to think about what you have as work and work on it so that it speaks and responds to these things. Now, right, so that's the first thing. So the second thing, that's the first thing you have to be aware about in terms of your work that you're looking at. Not all of it is worthy of publication. And some of it is written, or most of it is written in a way where it's written for a person who's marking your work rather than who is being educated by it. So, or excited by it. So when you write in your thesis, before you enter a section on methodology, many of you will have a definition, and you say methodology is defined as a blueprint to whatever. In an article, you don't do that. So there are clear, distinct issues that separate you by virtue of being a person who's publishing because you are achieving completion. But if there's one message I want to share, and share it loud and clear, is that do not think that your dissertation or your thesis are just things you copy and paste from in readiness for them to be published. It does not work like that. There's also many companies that run around telling people that you can submit your thesis, they'll publish it for you. Those companies are not accredited. The outputs they give are not accredited. What they will print for you is what in the world of publishing is called, it's called I will remember this. It's a novelty publishing, but there's a very specific word, and I said it many times yesterday, and I will say it again probably in 2 seconds. Vanity. They are vanity publications. If you know what vanity is, it's being in vain, being the act of vanity, the way that you look at the mirror and you basically acknowledge yourself and you praise yourself. That's what those publication options are. It is for self-fulfillment, for you to have it in a book somewhere so you can tell your relatives, I have a book. But in terms of scholarly value, it has no accredited scholarly value, and it cannot be used as you counting that it's a publication. Because good publications have a chance of not being published. So when you submit a journal to a journal house, there is a chance they'll refuse it. But when you give your thesis to a company that are doing it for money, there's no chance they'll refuse it. So this is the difference between someone who won a prize through racing for it and someone who was given a prize because there was no one to race with. That is the difference. So the next group are people who publish because they publish as a requirement of promotion at work. So many people who want to be professors, who want to be associate professors, full professors, or whatever level of professorship it is, they get there by proving certain things. One of them is that they have to publish a lot. So you find that people have they say, oh, I need to publish 9 articles, but you can't truthfully say you want to publish 9 things unless you know you have 9 viable standout ideas. If you don't, then when you start to publish, because you have a number to meet, the chances are the work will be mundane, it will not be brand new, and so forth. Now, typically, I'm going to say nothing for a minute and a half or so you can look at this. And when you look at this, there's nothing, this is the format of a typical manuscript. Nothing in there is brand new to you. It's all things you have done, all things that you do as part of your current work within research. But what differs is how you do them in a paper. So you have to listen closely to the fact that all these things look like subheadings, you know, but actually you don't know them because they are presented differently. They are meant to hit the reader differently, and I'll walk through them. Some of them, the transition is very obvious, it's very easy. Others, the transition is a little bit more difficult. So I will walk you through them now, and then we will be made. Right, so abstract in a paper, in a journal, the best way that you measure an abstract is to actually specifically go to the journal that you've targeted, look at published papers, look at the structure of the abstracts that they've got, but generally speaking, they're between 100 and 300 words, and they tend to be very precise, clear, and interesting. Many journals that offer, many journals that you would write into have a requirement that you fulfill certain subheadings. So generally the subheadings might be, the first one might be background, first subheading. In that subheading that says background, you give a background to the problem that you are looking at. And I say problem, not the the discussion, the problem. So if your article is going to look at the problem of why students fail, then your background would be something that gives a sense of how big the problem is, that also gives a sense of where we are failing to fix this problem. So maybe the background would be something like, studies show that 72% of all first-year students do not progress up until the second year. Then you acknowledge that maybe many interventions have been suggested to improve success rate, but to date, there is little agreement on what the best approach would be. That is your background. So you have told us that this is a big issue and this is how we are failing in relation to that issue. That is the background. The next part in that would be the aim, where you just state that the aim of the aim of the study was to carry out an assessment of the factors that contribute to success or failure amongst first-year students. Then you've done the aim. Then the next section is methods. And in the methods section, you would say a qualitative phenomenological case study was carried out, and it involved 26 participants, and they were asked to give the primary challenges they experienced when they failed, and so forth. Then you say data was analyzed using this. So that section that says methods, tell us the design you use, participants you use, what methods you use for data collection, what methods were used for data analysis. The next section in your abstract becomes your results. Of course, some will say results, some will say finding, whatever, but that will depend on what your journal has written. And in that results section, you don't write everything that your paper says. You write 2 or 3 standout issues. So maybe the first observation in this study that I've created would be that you're saying studies showed that there is no single accepted approach to improving student success. Then you name 2 or 3 other findings. The idea is to avoid things that are generic. So you don't say the results were discussed, the methods are presented, future research is discussed. No, you actually say that in the methods section, you don't say the methods were used. You tell us what the methods were. In the results section, you don't say results were presented. You tell us what the results were. And after the results section, people will always have a section that either talks about implications for future research or implications for future practice, any one of the two. And in that section, you are telling us that this thing that you found, what does it mean for the future of the knowledge in that field, or what does it mean for the future of practice in that field? So if our study found that there is nothing that can be done, then maybe the implication is that we do need to carry out much more targeted studies so we can look at this issue once again, or whatever. Then the last thing you do is just a conclusion, a conclusive statement. All this must happen in no more than 300 words, but your journal will tell you. It will tell you how you go around it. What you need to do is make sure that the structure I've shared with you, the ideas, you just double check it with your particular journal. Okay. Right. There's, of course, I told you that when you write the journal, there are subheadings that guide you. In the absence of subheadings, or before you even get to the subheadings, people can there are different techniques. And one of the techniques that helps you is this SPSC technique that's used. And this technique basically does exactly what I said you should do for your abstract, but it helps you to focus on the situation, describe what the situation that's currently happening in the field is, describe the problem, what is it about the situation that is problematic, the solution becomes the aim of what you wanted to do and the methods that you did and so forth. And then the evaluation becomes you commenting on the results and what that means for the future. It's just another approach to help you to figure it out. But what I said earlier stands and stands well. Excuse me. Okay, so I have covered all this. This example is just Brown. It's a guy called, goodness, I have to remember this name. Rogan Brown or something. He writes, gives guidance on the sort of things that you should think about when you consider abstract. None of it is brand new, you've seen it. It's just that he's positioned it in a way that some of you might find particularly appealing. Now, excuse me, you will remember that nothing that is complex that involves anything more than 2 steps can work without a very clear plan. So no one who writes a movie or writes a story just starts writing the story. You map it. You say, right, I'm going to start by telling them how big the problem is. I'm going to make sure that once I've told them how big the problem is, I will tell them how we can't fix it. Then I will tell you that this observation of us not being able to fix it is what forced me to develop a study whose aim was this. And in achieving that aim, these are the objectives that I had. And to achieve these objectives, I followed these methods. All of that is part of you developing a structure of the paper, understanding the flow, figuring out what logic you're going to pursue. Will you tell us the problem first? Will you tell it to us second? What are the meaningful titles that you will use? Are you restricted by the journal because they have put up their own titles and subheadings, or do you need to bring up your own things? Then, of course, the other thing that you do is when you've got this idea, given that all of you are novice writers, by virtue of being students, I assume that you're novice writers. I may be wrong, but that is the general assumption that one would have. In any case, so what you then do is to find an entity, typically your supervisor, because it is them who are also going to be your publisher, to say, this is the structure of my paper. Can I have some initial feedback about the sense it makes? Now, right, so when you are developing a paper, you have what is, remember I was telling you about how you develop your abstract and what you look at when you are developing this abstract, that you basically look at, you basically look at all the sections of the paper writing journey. The first section of the paper writing journey is actually you giving us a background to the problem, which essentially introduces us to why this paper. But what you do is you don't write it in the rigid way where you say, oh, the significance of this paper is this. You create a story that will demonstrate what the significance of the paper is. And the way you create that story is you start with the background and overview. That background and overview is you saying, this is the situation as it relates to this topic I'm interested in. The situation in terms of how serious issues are, how difficult the area is proving for my discipline to manage, how others have tried to research this problem. And of course, you want to end nicely with the confirmation that there are still things people are struggling with. And it's important for us to understand those things. Then, of course, that's when you get to this thing of saying, what are the implications? What are the further research questions that remain unanswered? And that then becomes you stating that, hey, this thing has not been studied. Therefore, I am saying that the purpose of this study or the purpose of the paper is to present a study whose aim was such and such and such. That then becomes a point at which you develop, that is essentially your purpose statement. And then remember something, when you're developing abstracts and the initial parts and all these things, be mindful of one fact. Everything about your paper is being read by someone who has minutes to spare. So if you go around the bush and you don't present what problem your paper is right at the beginning, how your paper is going to change things, then you are creating a situation where nobody will retain attention for long enough to even want to pay attention. So remembering also that the abstract and often the first part of your paper is all that people see before they decide to pay that 300 Rand or $24 to get your paper. So you recognize that it's your best foot forward first. Abstract has to hit hard. The first page or two when you are introducing the problem, how serious, how big, what the situation is, and how problematic it is that we don't solve it. That you kill us, where you make sure you make that stand out. Now, of course, people have these questions about what does the actual introductory part of a paper do? It provides the context, the situation where the thing that you are interested is happening. It also gives us a sense of why you think this is important, the statistics to show it is important, and what it is that made you decide on the fact that this is a necessary research topic. And you also then have to be specific in making it so that anyone who reads it, the more they read it, the more they actually buy into the purpose of your paper. People will always ask, how long should an introduction be? And the best bet, I mean, I can't answer that categorically, but it should not overwhelm the paper. Generally, it's depending on, there are some journals that allow 10 pages and so forth. So you can't give you a definitive answer. But what I can tell you is that you go to the journals you've targeted and look at what the other introductions have been. And that's what you're generally wanting to do. But you want the introduction to paint the complete holistic picture. So don't compromise that. But you don't want it to be repetitive. So once you've stated that the problem is bad in this way, don't say Smith said it, then Johnson said it, then Matthew said it, then there is no need. We just need that this is the situation, and then you can put the 4 names of the different people who said it. So you don't overwhelm the rest of the paper. Normally, when you write the introduction of a paper, you have a sense of where you think the paper is going to go. But of course, as you write the paper, at the very end, you must go back to the introduction and ask yourself, did this promise that I make in the introduction materialize? And if so, then I'm happy. If not, I need to change what I have in front of me. Now, the body of the paper. So the background, the introduction introduces the context, what's happening, and so forth. But what also then happens is that somewhere after you move beyond that acknowledgement of the problem, what you're aiming to do with it, and so forth, people then go into what they call the body of the paper. And that's where you present more of a head-to-head debate, literature review. So you basically are saying, what is the state of knowledge in this area that I'm in? What are people saying when, in one respect, who are the people who are proposing this position? How do the others differ from it? And so you get a sense of the debates, contemporary debates that are happening in relation to your topic. And that's what the literature review does. Now, you may discover that when you go to your journal, it doesn't have a literature review section, but it talks about background and overview. That overview part is the literature review. So you find that some people have extended what appears to be extended introductions, because actually the introduction is an introduction and also a literature review in one. But you won't know which one is good, which one you are pursuing, until you go to the venue, the destination, the journal you want. So the message is clear. Do not think you can write a paper without knowing where it's going, because the rules change by virtue of where it's going. It's literally like going to a party that has a dress code and someone has told you we are wearing a themed outfit, but you don't know what the theme is, and you just go to the party and you wear your own theme and you hope it will match. The chances you'll be wrong are so high, and this is the same story. Now, within the main body, once you have written the literature review, basically the literature review goes something like this. It will indicate the predominant question that's being asked. It will indicate that in relation to this question, there are certain positions and work that has been done to try and clarify this. Some work suggests these positions. Other work suggests alternative positions. Then the person who's writing might say, look, even though there are these differing points of view, this is where I believe I sit, or this is where you think the logic should sit. Then you also say, here are the areas where people agree, here are the areas where people disagree. Here are the areas where we don't have reliable knowledge. You end with that section that acknowledges that there is no reliable knowledge in relation to a particular aspect. Then you restate once again that, okay, I am now going to look at or present a study that actually tried to understand one of these things that we continue to argue about. Then you say, I present the methodology. So everything that you have in front of you there that talks about the literature review was to set you up. So set you up so you are at this point where you've shown that this has been done, this is where people argue, this is where they agree, these are the missing points. One of the missing points is the one I'm interested in, and this is the methodology that was done. Then you do the methodology. Now the methodology section is easy, very easy, in that many a time it is literally you taking the same methodology section that you had in your work and writing it differently, writing it shorter, making it punchier, taking away unnecessary definitions and so forth. But how much people write in that section and what they write in that section is all guided very, very clearly by the journal that you're targeting. Once again, the proof of what you want is in the pudding that's in front of you. Go to the journal that's been published, to an issue that's been published. And what you have to do is work on the law of averages. So, and you work, and this law of averages relates to a number of things. Firstly, if you go to a journal that you're interested in, you get three papers that they've accepted. You look at them, you analyze them, and you think, hey, these papers are not exactly the same, but they differ in this way. What is an average position that I can take that would fall close to how each of them did it? So that's the first point at which your law of averages applies. Secondly, because you want to increase your likelihood of being published, you don't just find one potential journal. You find 3 potential journals that you develop your paper with them in mind. Of course, if the 3 that you choose are different, you are going to have to apply a law of averages to find a middle point of developing your paper so it speaks to all the 3 journals. So, and that's it. Methodology, clarity is important, being succinct is important. Also, this is a point where some people utilize diagrams and so forth to just paint a picture and save themselves 1,000 words, literally. Then, of course, you focus on, in it, you are more really about communicating specifics and not spending a lot of time beating around the bush, defending your methodology. In a paper, you just state what you did. You may defend it in the discussion session, but not in the methodology. And then, of course, you've shared with us the methods you followed. Now, those methods took you and led you to a place where you have findings. And now with findings, you are literally going to say, okay, I had 20 things that I was interested in. I'm going to mention all of them, but I need to prioritize the ones that stand out and make my study memorable for whatever reason. So it is about the presentation of significant facts. Then, of course, usually when you begin the finding section, you explain to people how you've structured the findings. So someone might say, hey, when we began, we had 3 specific questions that we wanted answered. So my findings are reflected as being things that speak to each of those 3 questions. Of course, when you write now, when you remember you've written the findings, now there are other things that happen in this. So in the finding section, some people will say results, and results are just literally what you saw. Findings are a little bit different. They are more than results. They are results. They are you discussing the results. So you are saying, here are the standout things. Here are the limitations of my study and so forth. And the basic way that you approach discussion in an article is that you can't discuss everything. So you discuss those things that confirm what is already known, the key things that are already known. So if you're discussing findings of things that you saw, which specifically stand out because they confirm other research, you need to have a little bit of that to show the reader that, yes, your study is normal. It's found what others were finding. But above of that, you then say these are the things that you found that are outside of what has been found. So you show that you extended knowledge. And in your findings, you actually, in that discussion of your findings, you talk about what you found and how what you found relates to what is already known. So you are interweaving your findings with existing literature as if to say that these 2 things are now as robust a type of evidence as each other. And I want to see how the thing that I found relates to the thing that we've all been accepting as truth. So that issue around summarization, restating your arguments, presenting key things, you do that. You must also state limitations of research, because it is understood that the worst person you can be with is someone who has no appreciation of their weaknesses. So the worst paper you can see is one that portrays itself as if it's perfect and has no limitations. And that is what, so you need to present limitations that are associated with your work, but not things that are so bad that they're unfixable. So if you present limitations and you say, oh, the study was limited because all the research methods used are improper, that you can't be saved from. But you can say the study was limited because it was only carried out in one area, and the findings are potentially required to guide 70 other areas. But that limitation is easy to fulfill. All you are just telling people is that do more of my study in different places, please. That's all. So that's the type of thing that you look at. Implications for further research is you just saying, look, I have found these things. When I was finding these things, more questions emerged, and those more questions have an implication on where future people should go. They should go in the direction of answering those questions. Of course, towards the end, when you're concluding, you do all the summarization. There are basic rules about conclusions where you don't start new things you didn't volunteer. You don't make obvious statements that are not necessary, or the generic statements that are not necessary, where you say the conclusion offers conclusive statements. We don't need that. We know it, it's there. And of course, you can't introduce new facts that are saying different things from what you're saying, what you were saying all throughout the paper. So don't contradict yourself. Now, when you're writing a paper, there are things that have been studied, and there's just out of curiosity, those of you who are interested, India is the country that has the highest number of publications per capita. So the most people in India are published compared to anywhere else on earth. And not just by a factor of 1, by a factor of 7. And what they do is they study patterns of editors, they study patterns of reviewers, and they just tell you the do's and the don'ts of what you should do. So what this list is it tells you the things that they've found to be particularly interesting and decision swaying for editors. The first is this thing about originality. The more original your work is, and the more you make it clear where it is original, they love it. So you seek that, whether you're original by virtue of what you're talking about, or by virtue of how you dealt with your results, or virtue by the methodologies you used, they like that. Good catchy titles, originality, a well-articulated abstract that makes it clear you know what you're about. How you determine a good title is, once again, you going to the journal and saying, how are they structuring their titles? Do they have long titles? Do they have short sensationalized titles? I want to go down that route. Then the adherence to the editorial scope and objectives of the journal. Each journal has an author page on its website, and it will say that this journal aims to do A, B, C, D. We are interested in papers that fall within this category. If you write your paper and it's in line with those things, they like it. Then, of course, there's always this whole thing about, we want your paper to extend what we already know. So they look for that. They also want a paper that, in spite of it being written in a corner somewhere in Pretoria, its message and the thing it looks at has international and global possibilities. So I may be writing about an issue that I'm experiencing in my little corner department at UNISA, but unless if I talk about it and relate it to how this thing that's happening in my corner has been reported in other parts of the world, and they then see that article and think, we want this article because when we publish our paper, even someone stuck in Iceland will want to read it. Then research methodology, they want clarity about why you did what you did, being clear about your decisions, focused. Of course, they prefer evidence-based writings over things that are not so evidence-based. There are people who do opinion papers, and they don't generally like those. They'll accept one, but usually they accept it more because they know the person who's writing. But if you're applying fresh from the cold like you would be, they want an evidence-based, research methodology-based piece of work. So, of course, clarity around the implications of your paper. They want clarity in terms of a structure. So when we said sit down and plan your story, sit down, make sure someone looks at the quality of your writing, because if they read something and it's full of errors, it somehow gives them a sense that if you are missing out words in your grammar, there are many more things you're missing out. They just haven't caught them. Then, of course, that whole thing about being sound and logical and really working out how you're progressing your argument. And then, of course, finally, if you're going to want something that's being published in 2021, they want to see that you're referring to things that were recently published. Now, the pitfalls I've spoken about, people think that every study that they do, every one of their masters or dissertations are worthy, right, of writing about. Not every one of them is, but they can play around with it, so it becomes it. Then there's this thing about people beginning to think when they have a thesis or a dissertation, they've got this well of water that will be never ending. That's a mirage. It looks like water from a distance, but when you start to apply the necessary requirements of journals and scholarship writing, you realize that it wasn't really the water I thought it was. In experimental research, just be aware of some of the pitfalls that people do. Sometimes journals prefer to use materials and methods in their methods section as opposed to research methods. Just be clear. Then people struggle with the fact that they must remember they are writing for the consumption of other people. You're not writing so you just finish and you like the paper. You're writing for people who would ordinarily not like the paper. And so it is always about marketing, making your work pleasant, something that is inviting to a reader. Of course, the other thing, or the trick of the trade, is that if there are things that stand out about your paper in terms of the seminal discoveries, don't spend unnecessary time looking at all these things that are not seminal. Just focus on the things that stand out about your paper, that make your paper that wow paper. And then, of course, the other pitfall is the submission journey is tricky. So just before you're about to submit, all the admin things you can think of become a problem. Suddenly you realize that, the journal wants it to be font 12, this, that, and your paper is not that. The journal wants Harvard referencing and you've done it using Chicago referencing or whatever. But all these things, if you're a clever writer and you know where you're writing to, you can find out about them before you even write your first sentence. So you set your work so that it's written already in a format that would work with your journal. Now, normally, if your paper is rejected, typically you would go and ask why, but normally they give you a reason. They tell you we rejected it because it doesn't meet the scope of our journal. We've rejected it for this. But the word rejection is the killer, the only killer word in your world of publication. If you hear them write, we are unable to accept your paper and the outcome we've awarded to it is, and you see reject, then that's the end of your story. But anything else that they say that does not involve reject has the potential of being a revision you can work on. So you should just watch for that differentiation. And the minute they don't use the word rejection, they're saying to you that revise the paper and so forth. But if you are told you're rejected, you understand why, you correct that, you rework the paper now to a new journal, then you go to that new venue. Remember, you already began with 3 venues. Yesterday, I told you how you give each of them a hierarchy and you have most difficult ones to the easiest ones and so forth. Then you resubmit. Don't let the momentum go because it's easy to go. If you submit and any other word that you get any feedback that does not mention rejection, you must celebrate because your paper has moved to now being 66% likely to being published. And that 66% can move to 98 as long as you decide to take the paper that's been given back to you and say, right, they've made 20 things they want changing. I will fix those 20 things one after each other and then resubmit and write a cover letter to thank them for the 20 things and to assure them that you've attended to them and where they can find these. Once you've done that, your paper moves from being 66% likely to 98% likely. So that is the game. So a lot of this is a lot to do with what it is you're writing about, but a lot of it is to do with knowing the game, surviving the game of publishing. And of course, the types of things that come from reviewers are number of 4 types of things. So you can they can accept your work without any revisions, or they just say fix the typos. This is rare. I have, I think, in excess of 80 papers or so, and I've never ever had a submission without revisions. It always is something that needs to be changed. Typically, if you get a submission and there are no revisions, you ask yourself, did this journal really read this? Then secondly, the thing that we all dream for is that they say they accept it, but there are minor revisions. There are a few things that they're unhappy about. Oh, you didn't write this well. Change this into a diagram instead of describing it as such. Please move your subheading to here, those types of things. But once again, you note them all and you write a separate response to thank them for these minor revisions and to say you've attended to them in this way and so forth. Then the next is the accepted with major revisions. And those major revisions are usually to do with them really being unsure about your methodology section. So the minor revisions tend to be about technical things like your writing style, this, that, the order of stuff. But the major revisions are when they say, look, some of the methods you described we don't agree with in terms of them being scientific enough. And with this, usually, so if it's minor revisions in a general setup, the editor will see them, write off and accept. Major revisions, they go back to the people. And what happens, unfortunately, is there's a what they call a reviewer's drift. That someone reviewed your work on Monday will see it 3 weeks away and forget what it is they told you and try and look for new things. So how you lock them is when you write your paper, you write back and thank them for the things, and you say you've summarized the 10 things they highlighted, and this is how you fix them. So you remind them of what they've said. And then rejection, normally they say we don't want you, full stop. If you have done everything that I have guided you to do up to this point, you should never get a rejection. But if by some freak of nature you get a rejection, you should never give it up. You just rework your paper and you resubmit. But if you get a rejection because you took a dissertation piece and threw it in as was, then expect that you will get further rejections unless you really seriously rethink the way you've done the paper. Now, the whole process of reviews and revisions, what I have done here is to give you some insights of how journals operate. And I will tell you, and I spoke about this yesterday, that there are four or five different levels. So firstly, there is the level where the review is by a single editor. Then the other one is by an editorial board. They call that an open review. The editorial board, they sit together on a table and they circulate your paper and they say, Tennyson wrote this, what do you think? Does anyone know him? That type of thing. Then you get this whole range of peer review options. The golden standard being the double peer review, where you find 2 experts in the field. They are given the paper without your name on it, without a knowledge of what the other reviewer thinks, and they are asked to review it totally blind to all these things. Then, of course, when they submit it back, the editor will look at the different pieces of review, and good practice dictates that they take little bits from each and tell you what needs to be fixed. But because that takes a lot of time, what they normally do is send you all the feedback from the two reviewers, and you will often find that they contradict each other. But you're going to have to manage it, and maybe when you respond, you say, look, I opted this way because reviewer 1 asked for this. I appreciate that it contradicts what reviewer 2 asked for, but I opted for this option because of this and that. And then in a good journal, they normally respond to you between 6 to 8 weeks, but they acknowledge receipt immediately because they normally have an engine that you submit to, and as soon as your work is submitted, they send an automated email to say, we've got it, well done. Now, of course, the thing you should think about with review is that once you are in that place where they're telling you, we've not thrown away your paper, but fix these 3,000 things, you have entered the publishing cycle now. All that happens, if you stay on the bike, you will publish. The only reason you would not stay on the bike is if you refuse to correct. Normally, reviewers have sharp and sometimes discouraging comments, and it's a lot to do with the fact that they are normally reviewing many papers at once. The review process and the review activities that other academics do is free. We all review for nothing. So you realize that after a while, that kind of means that people have less patience. You know, sometimes you pay people a lot to be patient, but if you don't pay them that much, they are straight to the point. So you as the writer should just look for one word. If they use the word rejected, then you know your journey is over. But any other way of pushing you around, as long as they don't say reject, you are still in it. Then, of course, when you are reviewing or fixing the paper, there are ways in which you reassure the review team that you've got it, you understand what's necessary, what needs to be done. And you do this by doing a cover letter. And the cover letter, will acknowledge the editor in the comments, you thank them for everything, you clarify that these are the 10 things that were asked of you, you write them up, you tell them this is how you fix them, and of course, there are some things that will ask you to fix which you would not have had the chance to fix or decided against fixing rather. So, and this here is, I've given an example of how a review letter would look like. You rub people's egos by thanking them, demonstrating that you really appreciate their views. There may be 3 reviewers that have spoken, so you might want to respond to each of them independently. Or sometimes you do one global review to say you had 2 sets of reviews, they asked for this, they asked for that, they asked for this. Then, of course, remember there's that thing about pushing against that open door, that the minute you think you have got something that looks like an avenue for you to publish, start to sensitize that place about your arrival. And that's where the letter to the editor would be. And of course, you do that at the beginning of your publishing process, if you remember. But once again, if you get feedback and they are upset or not happy with certain things, you still write, and you write to the editor to acknowledge the changes and to say you fix them as best as you can. And I think I've said everything I need to say about that. Then, of course, there is the cover letter that you send just to tell them, to acknowledge and confirm that you are resending things. And But the better one of these options is where you list the things they found wrong and you explain how you are attending and fixing them. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is essentially what the writing journey is about. And I am just about to open up this thing. Okay, now let us see what questions are here. And we will get to these ASAP. Okay, now, I see that the live Q&A has been right. Okay, right. Let me get to this. Okay. PhD candidate Beran Hailu. Dear Prof, thank you very much for the impressive and very helpful lesson and explanation. My question, in using secondary sources, how recent should the date be? Is it acceptable? Look, if you collect data in 2016 and you're expecting to submit in 2021, it is, if the university you're in are allowing you to submit, then they are implying that it's okay. But the truth of the matter is, somehow, in a world free of COVID, which has literally taken away 2 years from normal operations, you would not be allowed. They would say the maximum you can have from start to end of a PhD is about 5 years. So that's, but in a world with COVID, now things have moved and it's still open for you to submit. So by implication, they are saying it's fine. Can we publish with other colleagues apart from a supervisor? Folks, you can, but for the purposes of meeting the university requirement, you must publish with your supervisor. That university requirement that talks about your work, it's literally saying, look, this work you are writing is from your dissertation or a thesis that you developed to the guidance of your supervisor. So they must be part of the mix. You might add an additional person, but you have to do that in discussion with your supervisor. What happens if I begin preparing a manuscript for a journal that is accredited in a list on 2021, then the following year the journal is removed from the list? Variezo, if you submit, at the point of submitting, if the thing is accredited, then you are fine. But it is very rare for this to happen by surprise. So many of the journals that are taken off accreditation lists, we know they are bad journals for 5 years running before they get removed. Please, may I know if the writing and publishing articles as a requirement for PhD graduation should include new sets of data collection? Diana, no, it should not. All you do is you use the data differently. Remember, in your study, you might have 5 objectives and collect data that satisfies these 5 objectives. But you might decide to write a paper that relates to only one objective. So you will refer only to the data that spoke to that objective. Please give an example of demonstrating my methodology as being robust. No, look, the way you demonstrate your methodology is robust is you support the things that you have done by saying you did this, and then you confirm that this was done by Smith or whoever. So referencing of your methodology choices is one way you do it. How can I get a free journal and index by Scopus? Different journals request different publication. So is there a general? No, look, you have to go to the journal website to find out. All the journals will have different requirements, and that is why I am indicating to you that I gave you generic guidance, but you must go to the specific targeted journals. And that's why you can never start a paper until you've gone to the journal. Clear cut. Look, with journals, you can't get journals. Remember, when you're writing, many journals have got publication fees. But if you're writing with your supervisor, each of us who are employed as supervisors at UNISA can get UNISA to pay the publication fee. So you just need to communicate with your supervisor. Why do universities make us write a dissertation when we'll later need to convert it to a journal article for publishing? No, I think you've misunderstood this. So you don't convert dissertation because we are interested in a journal. You are doing the dissertation as a way of demonstrating your ability to do research. And the ability to do research, if you remember, the final part of the research process is called dissemination. So you can't really say you've completed a research degree unless you've shown the ability to disseminate. It's just us making sure you do the entire research process. Oh yes, no, the last question was Beran Hailu, and I've answered that. Prof, thank you for the informative presentation. Do we get paid for publishing? Look, the way things are set up, if you're publishing within the context of a study, of a degree, you don't get paid. But the university gets paid. And your supervisor gets paid a proportion. So what most supervisors will do, just because they feel bad for the fact that you didn't get paid, is that they might say, look, if you have to go to a conference that relates to the paper, I will support you, I will help. But it's not a requirement, it's just a niceness that they do. But ultimately, you are not going to get paid. It is part of your course of study, it is a requirement. It may be unfair, but that's just the rule that I'm sharing. Yes, no, someone is talking about how you respond to comments of reviewers, doing a table. In the next column, you provided your feedback. In the last column, I showed changes made in the article. Yes, you can do that. Look, the bottom line is you want to show the reviewers that you have acknowledged what they said. That's it. Sometimes you writing feedback to them about what you think is counterproductive, because they will say to you, oh, so you are debating it. So sometimes it's not a good idea to do that. But as I've said to you, once you have got to the point where they're giving you feedback, all you have to do is just stay on the bicycle, because you'll get published. Okay. Frank is asking about the rights of ownership for your dissertations and theses. So here we go. The articles, of course, will always have your name on them. So they belong to you in a sense because they have your name. But the actual intellectual property that comes from your thesis and your dissertation, unfortunately, belongs to your university. And I, more than anybody, will know how distressing this is, because when I did my PhD, it was like quite seminal, and it had, I developed some model that is now used by the insurance companies, you know, to decide who is a high risk person and not. And when I developed it, it was for health reason, but they converted it and so forth. It was for a health, it was for a health purpose, and they converted it, and the university I was in sold it for hundreds of thousands of pounds, and I didn't get a cent. I was not entitled to a cent because it is the intellectual property of the university. The only thing that they did for me was they said, hey, we are sorry that this happened, and We are thankful for what happened, but we're sorry that you can't benefit in it. And we were so surprised by it, and they gave like a one-off thank you out of good gesturing, but nothing else. Right, folks, I think we've done enough around this topic. I have literally covered everything that we were meant to cover in 3 sessions. Tomorrow, what I will do is I will just open this platform up to have a very quick conversation about questions and answers that relate to the writing journey and so forth. But the actual presentation about the journey of writing is done. And one rule about writing is you cannot be a great writer without being a great reader. So if there's anything you do now to prepare yourself for writing is read as many journals as possible. Be interested in the structure they follow, how they lead their stories in, because once you get that right, when it's time to write your piece of work, it'll be done. It will be done. Yes, okay. Right, folks. On that note, it's 7:15. I think we've done a fair amount for the evening. I want to thank you and say I'll see you tomorrow, but it'll be a laid back session. Thank you. Have a good night.